Hello, everyone. Hi there. My name is Devin Largio. I am a litigation partner here at Kirkland. I want to welcome you to the final WOMN networking event of 2017. We at Kirkland are so glad to have you with us this evening. WOMN is pleased to have a slightly different format than usual for the presentation portion this evening. Tonight we have noted speaker, consultant, author, and entrepreneur Debbie Epstein Henry, who'll be speaking with Marla Persky about career, networking, and mentoring. As you all, I'm sure know, Marla is president and CEO and partners with Debbie Holzman, who could not be here this evening, which is why you get me, in WOMN LLC, a company dedicated to helping women succeed in the business of law. I suspect you'll hear more about Marla's career and background as she and Debbie chat tonight. A little bit about Debbie. She's co-founder of Bliss Lawyers, a company that employs high-caliber lawyers to work on temporary engagements for in-house legal departments and law firm clients. Debbie is also an expert on women, careers, and legal industry trends, and she speaks and consults on these issues through her company, DEH Consulting, Speaking, Writing. As with all the WOMN LLC cocktail party presentations, the floor is always open for questions and comments. So please join me in welcoming Debbie Epstein Henry and Marla Persky.
So thank you so much, Devin, for that generous introduction, and thank you to Kirkland. I'm so delighted to be collaborating with the firm again. It's always a treat to be here in Chicago and otherwise in New York and wherever we do these events. But Marla, this is about you tonight and WOMN and the amazing things that you've done in your career. And so rather than me read your illustrious bio, I thought it'd be more interesting to start with you telling your story, and just kind of walk us through your career a little bit. And in doing so, if you can share at least one personal story that's emblematic of who you are as a person and really sort of the development of your career.
Okay. Yeah. Let's see. How do you put 75 years into a really very pithy type of thing? Well, like all of you, I started out in a law firm, and unlike many of you, I came to realize really quickly that the practice of law was not something that I was particularly passionate about. And the interesting thing happened, and actually Elaine and I were at the same firm. She left a little differently than I left, but this was the days of boutique firms. This is in the 80s, so you can do the math a little bit to see. Boutique firms, and we're working at a boutique firm that thought it was very, very progressive. And they had this amazing idea where the partners wanted to invite the associates to attend a partner meeting so that we could see what it was like behind, you know, the hidden doors. And this was just a remarkably stupid idea for them to have done, because
it's a quick exit strategy.
It was a quick exit strategy because it gave we associates the opportunity to really see what very, very poor business people these men were. The firm was half litigation, half corporate. Litigation paid the bills. Constantly, and corporate paid the bonuses. But part of the discussion was by one of the corporate partners that, we can bill so much more for corporate and it's so much more profitable than the litigation. We think everybody who does corporate should make a lot more money, even the associates. I was a litigator. And it's like, all right, it's time for me to find another firm. And as I was beginning to think about, okay, how do I now move to another firm? This is where networking came in, and I didn't even know I was networking at the time because I got a call from a friend of a friend who worked for a firm, who represented a company called Baxter Healthcare Corporation, who had just acquired American Hospital Supply, two blood enemies in the marketplace. And so they acquired the business and lost all the people because the American Hospital Supply people were not going to work for the enemy. And those were the days where you could easily get a job just by calling up somebody. I know many of you don't believe those days ever existed, but they did. And so Baxter had to hire people, and that's when I got a call and I went in-house. And that was the luckiest thing that could have happened to me, because when you're in-house, you get to be a business person who just happens to know something about the law, as opposed to somebody who has to really love the law and make their career out of the law. So for the
and
next...
know the law.
And know the law.
That's a
know the law?
little
Right.
detail, yeah.
Little detail. So basically for the next 30 years thereafter, I got to be a business person with a law degree. And that's how it rolled.
And we're going to come back to that because there's a little more interest to that story that we'll save for just the moment. But you talked about networking, and it's so integral to what you do and your success. Walk us through a little bit more of your philosophy around networking and how you've been able to really use that skill that you have to get you to really interesting places in your career.
Well, I mean, the reason why we do this is to give people networking opportunities. She who waits to network for when she needs something is she who networks way too late. And so it's not like I was born knowing that this is the kind of stuff you should have done, but I stayed in touch with people. I am not an extrovert. People don't believe me when I say that. I am not. I really am an introvert. But I stay in touch with people when I meet them and I make the connection. I didn't realize that was networking. But it is, because networking is the establishment and the development of bilaterally satisfying long-term relationships. That's what networking is. You can't be a taker. You can't always be a giver. It has to work both ways, but you need to stay in touch in order for that to happen.
It can't be transactional. It can't be about a quid pro quo. And that's, I think, a big piece of your success that I've personally benefited from and seen you do with so many other people. I think what's integral about networking for you has been your generosity. You say, well, you can't just give or you can't just take, but with you, you are always extending yourself with the idea that, you're putting good energy out there and sometimes something will come back to you and sometimes it won't, but that's just the act of who you're going to be as you kind of navigate through life. Would you agree with that?
Well, I believe in karma. And that if you do good, you get good. Not always. There are assholes out there. We all know this. That happens.
Just for a moment, we are recording this.
Oh.
Okay. And I always try to tame her, and I can't. I mean, this is my problem. She's so tightly wound. It's really a problem.
I just can't be taught, apparently.
Okay.
So,
well, there are excerpts and things like that. We'll get to that.
This is why God invented editors. Anyway, so there's, if you believe that you will get as good as you give, then that's a life philosophy, and that's my life philosophy. And I'm not a Pollyanna, believe me. I'm as cynical as the rest of you lawyers are. But I expect that most people will do me a favor when I need the favor if I've done it for them, either when they've asked me to or when they didn't even know they needed it. It's sort of the same philosophy as how you get ahead in your career. You delight your clients. You give them things they don't even know that they need. And then they can't live without you. They can't imagine not including you.
Right. But I think what's integral to your message is that you're not waiting till the need is there, that you are already availing yourself. You're already delighting the client. You're not waiting to network until you need that job. You're just out there. And what I see with you is you're being a resource to people every moment you can be. And then again, maybe you'll have that need down the road. Maybe you won't. But that's what I see. I see you being a resource to people.
But I see you the exact same thing with you. And that's how you built your career.
Interestingly, Marla and I met on a stage 2012, right? And I was the direct recipient of that generosity of yours. And talk to me about why you make decisions and sort of how you go about your way of networking with people in a scenario like that where you meet somebody who's, in some professional context. What do you do next? What kind of initiative would you recommend? And there's such a variety of experience in this room, but what kind of tips would you give along those lines?
Well, first you need to listen to what the person says. because it's not me giving what I think the person needs. It's me listening to what they say. And we were talking earlier, I'm going to keep blaming Elaine for everything, but I matched Elaine with her husband.
Well, that is really impressive. I mean, is that a good thing? You know,
And
we have to actually.
Well, it's been.
Yeah. I mean,
certain days it's good, certain days.
Right.
But
she's still here attending
she's
your
still
event,
here,
so that's a good
and
tribute.
it's because you listen and you get to understand who needs what, who wants what, and that's. So when you were all out there talking, it would have been great. And there's this exercise that sometimes we do where it's the gift exercise where we say, okay, go talk to the person next to you. And what you're going to talk about is say one thing that you need. I mean, it's not, world peace. Something that you need, like my toilet is leaking. I really need a plumber. And see if the other person can give it back to you, because then it gives you an excuse for tomorrow when you go to your office, you say, here's that plumber I told you I was going to, refer you to. And thank you for the name of the travel agent, because we really are looking forward to putting an important trip together.
But what you're getting at, I think, is an important issue, and I actually do a talk just on this subject, the ask. Actually, I find with women, we're quite good at developing relationships and extend ourselves regularly. But a lot of the sort of the kind of clincher is making that ask. And I see a lot of women in particular falling short there. So what's your advice about getting the confidence to make that ask and not being, overreaching and that sort of obnoxious person you don't want to be, but appropriately making an ask when there's an appropriate reason to do so?
Some of us were talking about this earlier today. And it comes down to not asking for what you want. It might be viewed as a mind game, but it comes down to asking if you can help somebody achieve their goal. And I think it's easier to ask if you think about it that way. So as opposed to me saying, Debbie, it would be really great if you could throw business my way. I mean, which is what I want, by the way. But because I know you so well, I can say, Debbie, I know you're trying to get your new brand out there, and I think I can help you do that. Is there a way we can work together to do X? So that I'm giving Debbie something that she needs because I've listened to her, I've gotten a chance to know her, and find a way for it to be mutually beneficial, right, so that it's not so uncomfortable for me to say, really, just throw business my way, please.
Right, but also importantly, when you're a connector, which we both like to do and gives us a lot of satisfaction, there's value there, because in truth, if you have a friend who needs my services or if you connect us, you're doing that person a favor. Certainly you're doing me a favor, but also that person. So this idea of focusing on listening and particularly what people's needs are, I think has been a lot of your success there, is that you've been thoughtful about people and you keep people in mind when those opportunities present.
Thank you for assuming the generosity, but I think you may be misplaced. Because just like every...
do I fly to Chicago to be insulted? Do I need this? I can get plenty of insults in New York. I don't need this. Okay, but anyway.
I'll just follow you
there.
I'll get over
myself.
That's fine.
Yeah.
That's fine. I think people help people. There are Mother Teresas out there. I don't know very many of them. I think most people help people because it makes us feel good helping others. And it's part of our own self-worth. It's the reason why we give money to charity. Yes, we believe in the cause, but we're doing well by doing good, and it makes us feel good about it. And that's what networking isn't horrible and scary if you just own up to the fact that it makes you feel good if you can help somebody else. And assuming that they're not that, one of the 7% of the assholes out there in the world, they're going to feel good about helping you. I'm being generous here, If we were in Washington, it would be 75%. But we're not. We're in Chicago, so it's only 7.
So I think part of your success and really what's been a linchpin in your career is also about taking smart risks. And to me, what's behind smart risk-taking is having the confidence to do it and knowing when is the appropriate time to do it. Can you talk about your career in times when you did take some real risks and what the fallout was?
Failure is not the worst. Hi. That's okay. I'm glad you're here. Failure is not the worst thing in the world, because I actually think you learn more from your mistakes than you do from your successes. And none of us are brain surgeons, unless we are doing a pro bono, death sentence appeal. Nobody's going to die if we make mistakes. So it's a job. You take the risk. What's the worst thing that can happen? They fire you. Well, then you find another job. And so if you don't worry about this being the only job I'm ever going to have, because nobody else is ever going to hire me, you can take those risks.
Right, but there's a risk tolerance element to what you're saying. And I want to walk you backwards a little bit and ask, how do you get to that point where you have the confidence to say, oh, if I lose this job, I'll get another one. I'm not worried that my reputation may be at stake there. How did you get to that point? Because it's only a job, which didn't mean that I didn't take what I did extremely seriously. Didn't mean that I didn't miss more of my daughter's things than I should have, because when there was the trade-off, it always just seemed like what was happening at the office was just so much more important. I did all those things that you do every single day. But I wasn't going to do it to the point where at the end of my life, I would be able to say, I had a good, safe life. It was a good life. I didn't get hurt. I wasn't sad. Nobody ever fired me. I never made any mistakes. That's not what I want to be, assuming that your life flashes in front of your eyes before you're going to die. That's not the life I want to flash in front of my eyes. I want the life to be, I'm so damn glad I went ziplining. And, I'm glad that I had that little bit of a death wish and tried all of these things. And I'm so glad that I told that asshole off that time. We talked about the recording.
Oh,
Can you behave yourself?
Yes.
It's really,
Yeah,
I don't want to be
sorry.
responsible. Okay.
Yeah.
So I asked you about risk and you went to failure. So I think that's interesting. So I want to dig into that a little bit more and say, as you look at your career while practicing law, what do you think was the biggest mistake you ever made?
The biggest mistake I ever made was staying at Baxter longer than I should have. I was there for almost 20 years. And I think somebody looking from the outside would say that I failed at Baxter. Not for all of those 20 years, but in my last job, because I was fired as general counsel. So the risk I took was there was going to be a corporate change, and the CEO knew he was on the way out, and the general counsel had left, and it was a very politically charged environment. And the CEO came to me, and I was deputy general counsel when all of this was happening, and the CEO came to me and he said, Marla, I'd really like you to, I don't know how long I'm going to be here, but it's only for a period of time, and somebody new is going to be coming in, but please be general counsel. We need a general counsel. And I was like, well, hell yeah, of course. I mean, the job's mine to lose. Of course. I've always succeeded in everything. I'm going to take that job. It's going to be great. I'll wow whoever the new person is. And I took the job. And from the moment the new guy came on board, it was clear that it was not a match made in heaven. He didn't really like me. I certainly didn't like him. So what happened was I went from a job which I was at for, call it 17 years, excited to go into the office every day, and driving in, and I had a 45-minute drive, driving in and thinking about all the things I had to do and being excited about what I was going to accomplish, to driving in every morning with a stomachache. And I did that for 2 years. And I still think this guy should rot in hell. But
we didn't name him yet. We've only given it. We have to. Should we give the actual date of
who
his?
shall be unnamed. But but he did me a great favor. When I'm really being honest, he did me a terrific favor. Because if he hadn't booted me out, God knows how many years I would have kept driving into the office with a stomachache.
Right. So the lesson for you there would have been perhaps the risk of inaction often is greater than the actual risk you're contemplating?
Or that other people's version of success should not be your version of success.
Great point.
My God, I was general counsel of, a Fortune 200 company. Isn't that success? Isn't that the brass ring we're all going after?
So how do you separate yourself from that? How do you, particularly in a profession like law that's so focused on pedigree and this very linear path of all these kind of demonstrated examples of success, if you're on that trajectory, how do you suddenly say you know what, I may not be happy there. I've been for 17 years on this path to become the GC. It's now handed to me, and I'm going to be I don't have chemistry with this guy. I'll move on and, develop intellectual capital someplace else. I mean, institutional knowledge someplace else. How do you get there?
On my deathbed, what is the story that I want to have flash in front of me? I mean, it's very personal for everybody. What's important to you? What makes you happy? There's so much garbage going on in the world. If you can't make you happy, nobody else is going to make you happy.
But in some respects, what your story is telling me is that it wasn't until you had profound unhappiness in your role did you realize, this is not worth what this is. It's too great a cost. Is that right? Well, because those first 17 years you were gloriously happy. You weren't going to walk away. It was only when you saw this is not worth it. Is that right?
I would like to be able to say, yes, that's right, but I'm not sure that's true, because we often have hints along the way that we don't pay attention to. It's like when you're interviewing for a job, and do you have those little hairs sticking up in the back of your neck that you say, no, 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 it's so much more money, and it's so great, and oh, it's this, and it's a shiny this, and you don't pay attention to that? I think that there was writing on the wall.
So how do you get that self-awareness without having to make the wrong decision? Is there a way to pay attention to those hairs on the back of your neck when you haven't made that choice yet?
Well, you decide what makes you happy, and you decide what's ultimately going to be important and what are your trade-offs, because there's always trade-offs. You can't have everything. There's always going to be some trade-offs.
Right. But you're a very ambitious person. I think what would challenge many of us who feel that ambition is that that's what we're supposed to go for. And so reconciling the ambitious desire with this sort of happiness factor, do you have any tips along those lines of how to strike that balance and make enough of a good judgment with your own self-awareness?
It's a list of prioritization. What's the most important thing? So I am most honest with myself in the morning when I'm putting on my makeup. I have this big, huge makeup mirror because I'm at that point where I can see very little. You all are a Monet painting to me right now. But when I'm, putting on that eyeliner, so my eyeliner is extremely thick. There's a reason for it. I was thinking very hard this morning. So putting on my eyeliner, looking myself in the eye as I'm putting on my mascara, that's when I do my deepest thinking, because I can't lie to myself when I'm looking myself right in the eye. And so, when you've behaved badly and then you try to make excuses for that behavior, try doing that when you're putting mascara on. You can't, okay, I've learned from that bad behavior. I won't do it again. I'll apologize and I'll try. Or I've learned that other people's idea of success is not my idea of success necessarily. I don't need to be the highest paid CEO in the world. That just came out today, by the way. I don't know if you all read it. You would think I'd remember who it was. I do remember. She makes $9 million a year. How's that? A she. And I wish I could remember who she is and who she worked for. But it's $9 million a year. That's what stuck with me. That obviously was not what was important to me at the end of the day.
So I think about, and I want to open up to questions in a few minutes, so start thinking about some things that are on your mind. Just before, I want to ask you, I think that something interesting about you and looking at your career also is that you're very strong, you're very unabashed, and a lot of women who have those traits, as we know, are not everybody's favorite because, you know, it's too intimidating. The men sometimes are intimidated, and the women, frankly, are not always so supportive. What I think has been interesting about you is you've been able to demonstrate that strength and be able to be very powerful, but not hate it. And it's a very interesting line that you've been able to walk. Can you talk about how you've been able to do that?
Well, first of all, I'm sure there's plenty of people out there who hate me. So, you know,
we didn't invite them tonight.
They're not here, hopefully, but
it's
I'm
a
sure there's
audience. In fact, I was going to talk about that, but okay.
That's because they're not here. I use humor. Now, not everybody is funny, but it works for me, right? So I use humor. Most of my humor is self-deprecating. So it's hard to hate somebody who's making fun of themselves. At least from my perspective.
I think related to that, you make yourself vulnerable. So while there is, you know, these very clear demonstrated areas of success you've had, you're also willing to share a story about that firing. People often will not share that. So that's also a certain level of confidence and comfort that you have. And again, I'll ask you, is that something that evolved for you, or have you always been able to just put it out there and just be comfortable with that?
I haven't been able to. Again, I am really an introvert. So putting it out there was something that I had to learn to become comfortable with. And the way I found that path was, I really don't care what people think about me. I was never the popular girl in school. I was one of the girls that really wanted to be the popular girl in school, but I wasn't one of the popular girls in school. And the minute I started to, and this of course didn't happen until I started to have to color my hair, but when I realized that those popular girls were probably not any happier or sadder than I was, and what I would have to do to be one of those popular people was not something I was willing to do, then it was easy to take the curtain down. Because I didn't worry if people were judging me. Because it didn't really matter. Of course, there are some people who do matter very, very deeply to me. And I like you all very much, and I don't want you to feel bad about this, but your good opinion of me doesn't really matter that much. I want to help you. I want us to help one another. What's much more important to me is that you believe as passionately as I do that if we don't help one another, nobody else is going to help us. But do I care if you invite me to dinner? This is God telling me, right? You know.
Yeah, there's some symbolism in that.
There's some symbolism.
No question. Yes.
Right. So it's, you know. If you're always worried about people liking you, you don't have the space you need to do what has to be done.
You mentioned, of course, us helping each other. Is there anything that you think is unique to women helping women?
No, actually, I don't think there's anything unique to women helping women. I think there is maybe a moral responsibility too, because it's harder for us to get ahead. And it's just because we didn't write the rules of the game. If we wrote the rules of the game, there should be a bunch of men sitting here saying, how are we going to help one another? Because it's not our ball, it's not our rules, and it's not our playing field. Well, you know, Title IX allows us to play on a playing field, but it's still not our rules and not our ball. So it's harder for us to get ahead. We can make it easier for one another. But at the end of the day, the things that we struggle with are the exact same things that men struggle with. They just have more things at their disposal that will help them reach success.
I want to ask you one more thing before opening it up, and it relates to this prior question I asked around your your self-deprecation and things like that. I think you've been very effective at demonstrating your value without being that obnoxious self-promoter in the room. I think part of it is you have a humility and a sense of humor, like you've said. But can you give any other advice about how to do that? How to show that you are really contributing without, again, crossing that line of being offensive and all those things that, we've seen in others that we don't want to be?
Well, one is to assess what you can bring to the table that other people don't. Not that they can't, but they don't. And then you bring it to the table so that every meeting you attend, every project you are on, every piece of work that you do, you're bringing that thing to the table that you excel at that nobody else does. And I'm not talking about, I know more about how to do indemnity clauses than anybody else in the whole world. That's not the kind of thing I'm talking about. What I'm talking more about is the type of thing like, I'm really good at summarizing what everybody said at the end of a meeting so that when everyone walks out of the meeting, they walk out with hearing the same thing and getting essential agreement. Or, I'm really good at asking the question that nobody else will ask because they're afraid of looking stupid. So I'll ask the question, and then, just for fun, I'm going to look around the table and see how many people go, oh, thank God she asked that question, because they had the same question. Right. What is it that you do, that you bring to the table that makes the group better because you're there?
Yeah, I like to think of it as a signature.
Yeah.
And actually also having the comfort of, it's a good thing to have that signature. It's good to be known for something. It's good to contribute in a way that is emblematic of who you are just generally. So I want to pause there and see if we have some questions. And if you want to say your name and affiliation, terrific. We don't have a mic, right? We'll repeat that.
Issue, so it's easier if folks ask the question
and we'll repeat it. Right.
Yeah.
No problem.
Anybody want to start? I have to confess, I know a bunch of names in this room, and I know Marla does. So just beware. You could be called on. And I have plenty of, yes, please.
So, interesting what you said about getting over the fear of being liked. And I wonder if you could speak a little bit about, because I think that women may come from a position, leader, people who kind of follow you. I wonder if you could say a little bit more about that.
So the question, I think it's a really important one, is picking up on your comment before about not being concerned about being liked. But particularly as a leader, sometimes people feel that they need to be liked. So how do you overcome that as a leader and reconcile with that possibility of, maybe people don't like me?
Well, yeah, a leader has to be respected. And you can scare people into following you. That's not respect. But I believe if you are a good leader, number one, you have a leadership style that can be flexed to fit the situation. But you don't have to be popular. You have to be honest and truthful and trustworthy. And that's what people expect of their leaders. So, all right, I'm a Democrat. I will admit it. I dislike Hillary Clinton from a very, very visceral spot in me, but I voted for her, and I would vote for her again because I think she was the best candidate, and I actually think she's a really strong leader. But I really would not want to go out and have dinner with her. And I certainly don't want to have dinner with Bill. But I respect her as a leader, and I personally think that it was a crime that she didn't become our president. So putting politics aside, you don't have to like the person. You have to respect them. You have to know that they have the qualities necessary to fulfill the job. Good leaders, leadership is about creating a vision and then having other people want to help reach that vision, make that vision a reality. Not commanding it, but having them want to. So you relate to them. That's
Right.
one reason why I use humor. It makes me relatable.
Right. I would just add, and it's interesting, some of the Harvard Business Review pieces on leaders is that, there are different types of leaders, and we know that. One of the pieces I recently read just talked about sort of 3 different types. One being sort of that iconic person who's like the visionary who you want to be like and sort of helps you sort of be inspired by just seeing what they see. Another is like that terrorizing leader that we've all unfortunately probably experienced at some point in our career. And the third is sort of that cultivating, supportive type of part. So I think that's a piece of this too, is there's certainly different characteristics of types of leaders and I think this notion of respect rather than like is a really important distinction.
And at the end of the day, I think the most important thing for a successful leader is to be able to flex the style to meet the situation. So sometimes you have to be command and control. In the case of an emergency, something terrible happens, well, let's all get together and get a meeting of the minds. That's not going to work. So you need to take command and control.
Right.
And then there are times when we need to change a culture, so we have to be collaborative. And you need to know what you're leading for in order to use the skills and the approach necessary.
Right. So part of it is assessing the circumstances. Another piece, of course, is knowing your audience and knowing how you're going to inspire people.
And please, I don't go about trying to be hated.
That's a unique skill.
You might want to talk to my husband about that. But, that's not my goal. But conversely, my goal is not to be the most popular girl, not to be loved. I don't want to be hated, but I don't want to be loved. I want to be trusted. I want to be respected.
I think the other piece, Marla, about you is you want to have impact. And by having impact, you're not taking the easiest path, and that you're putting yourself at risk out there. But it's at the risk of not being liked sometimes. But that's not who you want to be. You want to inspire people. You want to impact people. You want people to question themselves as a result, right?
Well, there are things that have to be done in this world, and some people, like Gandhi, can get things done on a big, huge scale, and some people, and I'm one of them, can only get things done one little step at a time. But I know that, and I'm okay with that. I'm cool with that. If you can all do little steps too, think of how much we can do when we get all together. We can all be Gandhi when we add it all up.
Did you have a hand up?
I did not.
Okay.
I'm enjoying the conversation.
Okay, good.
But you actually,
Sure.
One thing that you said is actually really interesting. Resonated with
The rest of it was boring as hell. I'm just kidding you, Suzanne. Right.
was the concept of being liked and being a leader, and I think I've been working almost 30 years, and I still think like that little girl, buddy, and it's interesting, I think a lot of people struggle with that, and I guess it is, but you've presented an interesting dichotomy. I guess it's more of a comment that you sort of have to shed that I want to be liked to get the job done.
So this comment that you're adding, and again, for the purpose of the video, I just want to reiterate, is this dichotomy that you've presented between wanting to be liked on the one hand and wanting to be a good leader and sort of reconciling that. I want to piggyback that and just ask, I've done some work with different leaders, and something that has come up repeatedly, particularly with women leaders, is it's lonely up top. And so I just wonder if part of this yearning for being liked is not just, to be, that girl who wants to be popular, but it's really that, you don't have the same colleagueship as, let's say, you're a partner at Kirkland. You've got all these Kirkland peers who you can go to. And then you're GC of a company, And, these people are not they're not the same level. They're reporting to you, or they're business people who you have to answer to. So how do you do that? Do you think that's part of it, is this sort of loneliness up top? And how do you demonstrate and navigate that?
I think it is lonely at the top, but I don't think you know that until you're at the top. So it's not, it doesn't stop you from trying to get there, because you don't know what you don't know until you know it. But what I think does do us as women a disservice is most of us were raised to be good girls. And it's very hard to overcome that. So I never had brothers, but believe me, I saw little boys in my life. And, they're running around, they're jumping over the furniture, they're ripping down the curtains. And Jimmy is just such a wild spirit. Look at that kid. He is just full of the devil, but isn't he adorable? And then Jane is running around the table like a banshee, yelling and screaming when everybody else is sitting down at dinner. And Jane, sit down. Janie, nice girls don't run around the table. Janie, sit down. If you're going to behave that way, go in the other room. It's I wasn't the only one raised that way, right? You've all heard that too, right? I had this momentary, oh my God, it's only me. So that's how we were raised. How do you overcome that?
And what's your answer to that? And it's interesting, Claire Shipman's book, The Confidence Code, she talks precisely about this, that girls are raised to stay in between the lines. And
color inside the lines.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And when we do finally get that confidence to go outside of it, we're punished for it, because that's not what girls should be doing. So even if you get over that first hurdle of having the confidence to be out there and running around like Janie is doing, then, you have to deal with this recourse, because people are saying that's not what nice girls do. So how do you manage that?
To steal a trademark, you just do it. Because what's the worst that happens? So when your mother yelled at you to sit down, what happened? She didn't put you up for adoption, right? She didn't lock you out of the house. So somebody yells at you.
But the other piece of that is, what if you're so conditioned to stay between the lines that you don't do that? You never are acting like Janie. How, as an adult, do you suddenly get the sort of change of impetus to be willing to put yourself out there, if that's not how you've been conditioned to be?
Two things. What are your priorities? If your priority is to achieve X, and the only way you can achieve X is not being such a nice girl, and that's the single most important thing, you do it. And number two, you start wearing eye makeup. So in the morning, you are looking at yourself and you say, I'm just going to do it. I can do it. What's the worst thing that could happen to me? They'll say, I'm horrible. I'm a bitch. I don't work with her. She's impossible to work with. So what? So what?
Other questions, Becky?
Well, not really a question. Along the same lines, how do you get beyond that? Maybe not necessarily going outside the lines, but a little bit. Isn't part of the solution to that not just the network, but the support? Question you could say, honest with you and tell you terrible idea, or no, you really should do that.
So this comment about having basically a personal board of directors, as many people call it, who you can confer with and say, am I missing the boat here, or am I on track? What do you think about having that community of support?
Nobody can do it alone. And I completely agree, Becky. You have to have, I call it a posse. You need to have a posse to ride with. Because otherwise, you're just sitting there a target for the bad guys. So that's why you need to have your posse. But you have to pick your posses in a smart way. You don't ever want to have fans on your posse. Because fans don't tell you the truth. Fans fawn. And I mean, believe me, I like fawning as much as the next guy, but that's not the person who I want advice from. That I want, my best friends will say, "Oh, Marla, you're so full of crap. I can't believe it."
I think it's important really to have representatives that are different, that have different views. And I absolutely agree with you. You can have people who are just fawning, but I do think you can also push back so that if you have a friend who's like, "Oh no, Marla, that's great," and you know that they're full of it, you can say, "It's okay. You tell me if there's one thing I can change here," and then they tell you. So you can really, there's ways of receiving feedback, and then there's ways really of receiving feedback. I think you had a comment. Yes.
I had a question. So you mentioned that one of your self-deprecating humor. I think cautioned against that often as well because bad about yourself, that just opportunity for that part and not listening to it. So is that something that you employed later after you built a little cachet, or is that something that just
So do you feel that self-deprecating humor is something that you have to come to later in your career because of the risk that if you self-deprecate, people will believe that, that in fact is really those negative qualities actually do exist, particularly men may perceive that?
I think I always did it, and that was just me, and what works for me doesn't work for everybody else. But if you listened to my humor, you didn't hear me say, "I was such an idiot." I might say, "Am I the only one? Are you with me?" I think men find the same things funny as women find funny. And at a very visceral level, everyone has the same foibles. And so if in self-deprecating humor you can touch those human foibles, then it doesn't go back to bite you in the ankle.
I think, Devin, you had a comment. I just want to add, I absolutely agree with what Marla said, and there's a really interesting book by a woman, Peggy Klaus, who the book is The Art of Tooting Your Own Horn Without Blowing It.
Yeah.
And she talks about the use of self-deprecating humor in self-promotion. And again, to the point you underscored, it has to be authentic to you. If you're not funny or if it's forced, then that's really a disaster. Because then, you got the problem with the self-deprecation, and then you got a whole bunch of other problems. So I do think when done well, it can be really effective. Devin?
So this is something we were actually talking about in our small group just before this networking session. It sort of piggybacks off Deanna's comment about things being different for men and women. So I'm sure us, we're living under a rock, we're all aware of all kinds of sexual harassment allegations coming out from Matt Lauer, to Harvey Weinstein, various politicians. It's all over the place. How is it that this might affect women trying to network with men in particular, who may be afraid to have dinner with a woman, be alone with a woman, have a closed-door meeting with a woman, and as a result of all these allegations, for fear that they may fall victim to it, and it may become harder than it maybe already was for women to get into the old boys club.
There's been a lot of discussion about this, and the question is, in light of all the sexual allegations about Matt Lauer and Harvey Weinstein and unfortunately numerous others, what about the risk of backlash that your average guy at law firms and otherwise, they'll be afraid to really create opportunities for women, whether it's, and have dinner with them, et cetera, for fear that they too will find allegations against them?
Well, first of all, you need to be a regular person and have people realize that you laugh, you can make jokes. I'm not saying you're going to stay in the corner and tell dirty jokes, but you have a sense of humor, and you don't take every little thing that somebody does, whether they're a man or a woman, personally, and you don't look for offense. You assume noble intent. And so you'll give people the benefit of the doubt. Now, I have heard men say things like, "Well, I'm afraid to travel with women now because, who knows? You know, I don't want there to be an allegation that I harassed her. And so my answer, and of course this is on tape, my answer back is, so are you going to masturbate in front of her? If you're not going to do that, maybe you shouldn't be so worried. Opening the door and say, after you, is not harassment, and nobody's going to say it's harassing. Putting your hand on her breast? That's probably not quite the same thing. So what are you afraid of? What is it that you do that you think can be misconstrued?
Right. And this is all patterns of behavior, but I do think if you are that junior associate who wants access to an influential senior male partner, I think you start that relationship in, public venues over lunch, not dinner, and there's this sort of graduation to a relationship where there's more trust that evolves so that people are less suspecting, right?
And yes, but I personally believe nothing good ever happens after 8 o'clock at night. So you just don't put yourself in that sort of situation. When the guys go out for a drink, let them go out for a drink and go to your room and watch a Hallmark movie or whatever it is you want to do. All right, so, we aren't guys, and I think it's a mistake to try to be guys. But the single most important thing to get ahead is to ask for what you want.
Right.
Because if you're not going to ask for it, so I was once a young associate. I know that's hard to believe, but I really was. And I would walk into a partner's office and say, can I go with you to the deposition? I want to see you take the deposition. Can I do this? Can I do that? Again, what's the worst thing that can happen? They say no. All right, then I'll ask somebody else the next time. You've got to ask for what you want. Working really hard and doing good work isn't enough. You need to be an advocate for yourself, and if you're not as good an advocate for yourself as you are for your clients, well, shame on you.
So it's actually a minute after 8, and since nothing good happens
after 8. Unless there's a drink in your hand
right.
and you're with girlfriends.
Right.
So.
I think it's a really important parting message, this notion of asking and having the confidence to do that. And I want to conclude by telling you what an honor it is to have this opportunity to interview you, to have you as my friend and colleague, and to salute you. It's really, you've done amazing
Debbie.
things,
And
Marla.
the most ironic thing is that almost everything I've learned in starting my own business, I learned from this woman. And of course, she's pretending that, oh, no, Marla, it was all you.
No, Marla, it was. It was you.
Thanks, Debbie.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Marla.
So a little bird has told me that there are drinks and there are hors d'oeuvres that have moved out towards the front lobby, and I don't know about you, but I'm ready for wine because I didn't have any before. Please join me. And thank you, Kirkland, and thank you, Devin. Really appreciate